More and more doctors are adding cash pay options to their practice. And it's not about abandoning insurance or changing who they serve. It's about adopting to a healthcare system that's getting harder to sustain, lower reimbursements, more administrative burden, and slower payments. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to create cash pay options in your practice and why so many are doing it right now. I'm also going to teach you how to implement it in a way that actually works without blowing up your existing model. Now, as you know, insurance reimbursement is going down while your overhead keeps going up. At the same time, administrative work is increasing. You have to do prior authorizations, claim denials, and delayed payments. And that pressure can add up fast. Now, a cash pay option creates faster payments, fewer staff hours spent on billing, and more predictable revenue month over month. And again, this isn't about abandoning insurance. It's about diversifying your revenue so your practice stays more stable and you can focus on patient care. Now let's talk about what cash option really means and what it doesn't. So when I say cash option, I don't mean turning your practice into a cash-only model. Most successful practices today are doing a hybrid model. They still accept insurance for certain services they offer, and they offer cash pay for others. This approach gives patients more choices, and it gives your practice more control over pricing, time, and delivery of care. Again, a cash option doesn't have to be about replacing insurance. It's about building flexibility in your practice so that you're not dependent on a single revenue stream. Now, the services that work best for cash pay options usually have a few things in common. They're predictable costs, they have clear outcomes, and they have a high perceived value. And here's the important shift that's happening right now. Patients' deductibles are higher than ever before, and a lot of patients are realizing that paying cash can actually be cheaper than paying their deductible and copay. On top of that, insurance does not always cover everything a physician believes would be helpful. Cash options allow you to offer those services without fighting prior authorizations and coverage limitations. This is why cash pay works especially well for things like consults, second opinion, aesthetic or wellness services, certain procedures, bundled services, memberships or packages, and even same-day or priority appointments. These are services where patients understand the value, and they often prefer the simplicity of paying directly. Now, when it comes to pricing cash services, the first step is knowing your true costs. Now, that's going to include the time of you and your staff, your supplies, your consumables if you have any of those, and overhead if you want to add in the overhead part. Then you want to mark it up so that you're making 50 to 100% profit margin. That way you don't just charge what feels reasonable in your mind. Next, you're going to look at the market rates in your area so you understand where you fit. But don't underprice your services based on fear. If your service delivers real value, patients are willing to pay for it. And instead of discounting, focus on building services to increase value. Packages and memberships often feel better to patients, and they also create a more predictable revenue stream. And finally, be transparent. Clear, upfront pricing builds trust, and patients appreciate knowing exactly what they're paying before they say yes. Once pricing is clear, the next step is actually how you introduce these options to patients without it feeling awkward or salesy. Now, when you're introducing cash options to patients, the framing matters. So position it around convenience, faster access, and a much simpler, enjoyable experience. It's not a limitation, but it's an option. Now, your team should be trained clearly to explain what's covered by insurance and what's offered as a cash pay, and why certain services fall into those categories. The clarity actually builds trust, and it's also going to reduce confusion. And one important note, avoid apologizing for price. Confidence matters. When your team explains these options confident and clearly, patients are far more likely to understand the value and move forward. Plus, you shouldn't judge someone based on their looks. You never know what they can afford unless they tell you. Cash options work best when they're presented as a normal part of how your practice operates, and it's not something that you have to justify. Once you decide to offer cash plan options, there are a few operational changes you'll need to put in place to make this run smoothly. First, you need to have clear payment policies. Most cash services should be paid up front, so there's no confusion for patients or for your team. You also want to have a card on file to streamline the checkout process and avoid awkward payment conversations. Decide upfront if you want to offer payment plan options or use a third-party financing option like Cherry or Care Credit. Having this decision made ahead of time keeps your team consistent and confident when explaining their options. From there, make sure you have a clear way to give the patient an invoice or a receipt. This is so that patients know exactly what they paid for. Now, your website and FAQ should be updated to clearly explain your cash services, pricing, and policies. And finally, make sure both the front desk and the providers have scripts. Consistency is key. When everyone explains cash options the same way, it feels intentional. It's not confusing or improvised. And if you plan to accept cash or checks, you also need a clear policy for handling that. This means having checks and balances in place. You don't want one single person responsible for collecting, recording, and depositing the money. At least 2 people should always be involved in this process. It reduces errors and protects both you and your staff. This isn't about distrust. It's about good financial control and clean processes, especially as your cash revenue grows. Now, here's the common mistakes to avoid. One of the biggest mistakes I see is trying to convert everything to cash overnight. Cash options work best when they're introduced intentionally, not all at once. Another common issue is underpricing your services. If pricing doesn't reflect your true costs and value, then your model won't be sustainable. Not training your staff is another big miss. If your team isn't confident in how to explain the cash options, then patients are going to feel hesitant. Also, inconsistent messaging also creates confusion. Patients should hear the same explanation, whether they're talking to the front desk or the provider. So train your staff with the script. And finally, make sure you're tracking your cash services separately. If you're not measuring its profitability on its own, it's hard to know what's actually working and what needs to be adjusted. So here's how to start small and test it. You don't need to overhaul your entire practice to get started. Begin with one service or product or procedure, or even one simple membership option. Starting small allows you to test without creating disruption. Then use that information to adjust before you expand. This approach keeps the process manageable and helps you build cash options that actually fit your practice instead of forcing one that doesn't. Cash options aren't a trend. They're a strategic response to how healthcare is changing. If you're thinking about adding a cash option, but you aren't sure where to start, or maybe how to price it, or even how to roll it out without disrupting your entire company, then you can book a free call with me. The link is in the descriptions below. We'll look at your current setup and map out a cash strategy that actually fits your practice and your patients. If not, I'll see you in the next video. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you found this video helpful.